Hello everyone and welcome once again to The View from the Midwest. It's time for another St. Louis FC post-match edition, the final one of the season. And for those of you who were at the game or at least were able to watch it on YouTube, you saw a pretty decent contest to close out the year for the good guys as they defeated their rivals, the Louisville City FC, I believe, by the score of 2-1. It was an interesting game. There were bits of lulls here and there to where things didn't necessarily go well for either team. And obviously the game didn't start off all that great for St. Louis as they fell behind 1-0. But some solid offensive work from this team. Again, decent work by the midfield. Still some stuff to work on there for next season and beyond. But the stalwarts of this team so far have been the defense, and then the offense kind of came along here at the very late stages of the season. Still not necessarily the kind of offense that you would like to see, but still, as long as goals are hitting the back of the net, you can't ask for much more. Jamil Hardware had just a heck of a game on Twitter. He was my man of the match. You can vote for whoever you want. Tweet to at Pleat Steam and St. Louis FC. That's how you usually get the man of the match. Obviously, most of you probably already know that if you're on Twitter. But Hardware just had a heck of a game. Not just because he scored the goal, because if you give it to a goal scorer who did a lot offensively, then you could make a case for Kingsley Bryce, because Kingsley Bryce had one of the best games I've seen him play all season. I mean, he was just sprinting up and down the field. He was really good getting back and helping out on defensive work. He just played a top-notch game. But Jamil Hardware was just really solid top to bottom. He scored the goal. He was setting up passes. He had great touch on the ball. He was very similar to what we saw at the beginning of the season before he was hampered by a lot of injuries. And because I remember in the first couple games of the season when me and my wife were at the games, thinking to myself, it's like, this guy is probably the best guy on the team right now. And because you could tell that there was just a ton of difference between when he was on the field and all of a sudden when he got injured, the dynamic of the offensive flow of the team was completely different. Well, the Jamil Hardware that we saw against Louisville on the season finale was the Jamil Hardware that I think I expected to see throughout the season. Obviously, injuries played a big part of that. But he had great touch on the ball. He was getting back and helping out defensively when needed. Not necessarily as much as Hardware was, because Hardware was playing more of a winger position. Therefore, you're asked to kind of come back and help out defensively a little more. But he had great touch on the ball. And he wasn't a lone striker. He was mainly kind of tucked in behind that striker. But if he was up top and held up the ball, he would keep the ball. He had good touch in and around defenders, made some good crisp passes, nice flicks, and he just had a solid game overall. But again, St. Louis FC as a team had a solid match overall, and it was encouraging to see, if for no other reason, because obviously as fans and supporters were extremely disappointed that this club didn't make it to the playoffs, didn't have a good enough push from the mid-season to about the last month or so of the season, didn't have enough push there to put themselves in a position to succeed. But it was encouraging to see because you saw this team come together as a team. There was a cohesive unit out there, especially the last 3 home games, which were actually victories, which was weird in and of itself given how most of the season went. But the good thing, again, was you saw a cohesive unit, as I mentioned. You saw players fulfilling their potential, because as I've said, whether the situations were good or whether situations were bad, you could see in this team, in individual players, you could see why they're getting paid to play professional soccer. It's not as though anybody out there is like, well, who signed this guy to a contract? You could see individually why they were out there. But finally, over the last few weeks, you could see why they were put together as a team. why they were in certain places, why their strengths were finally put to the forefront, and why that's exciting for next season is because it finally gives St. Louis a bit of a foundation to lay going into the years to come. Because I remember, and I was not alone, I was far from alone in thinking this, there was a good stretch in the middle of the season when the team was playing extremely poorly to where you could honestly, whether you liked a certain person, whether you liked a certain player, whether you liked a certain style of play within this team, there was honestly a point during this season when you could not sit there and say, we have to keep this guy. Everybody else can go. We need to keep this guy. Now all of a sudden there's at least a solid handful of players that really are going to be the foundation of this team, hopefully going forward. Obviously, I'm not quite up to date with the inner workings of the USL and the contract situations, if everybody on this team signed a one-year deal or if they signed multiple-year deals. But going under the assumption that whoever the team wants back would come back, I think St. Louis FC has a really strong center back pairing now. They kind of solidified themselves. There was a lot of moving pieces in the back four throughout the year, but I think Sam Fink and James Musa together, they have the height, they have the speed, they have the tenacity to really kind of form a really solid center back pairing. Now, if the team goes out and signs another center back, I'm not going to be hurt because obviously you need depth. But James Musa is a talented enough player to where you could put him in a defensive midfield role and kind of push him up the field a little bit more if necessary. We saw that happen in a few of the games, and St. Louis FC did not do too bad when that was the case. But I feel that if massive changes aren't made to the roster, that Fink and Musa should be your starting center backs going forward for this team. The wing back positions, I like the players that they have there, but if you can add some extra speed along those lines, then I would not be necessarily disappointed if they would do so. The defensive midfield role is kind of something that the team didn't settle on until towards the end of the year, and for whatever reason they ended up putting Brian Gall in that position. And Brian Gall was an extreme enigma for most of this year. He started out as a forward, kind of got pushed back. He got pushed out to the wings, then pulled back to the center, and then pushed back as the season went on. I have nothing against Brian Gall personally. I don't know the man. Strictly going on what I see on the field, you see that he's talented. You see that the skill level is there. There needs to be more work rate because obviously somewhere along the line somebody decided that this kid was talented enough to play the game. He was in the Los Angeles Galaxy system, for goodness sake. But just from what we saw over the course of the year, he's probably the only player that I ever had anything wrong with, simply because you could see the talent level there, but I don't know that the work rate was always there. But this isn't necessarily a video where we're trying to look and pick and nitpick everybody's little performance, because everybody throughout the year had performances that they would like to forget. But just overall, he would be the one player that I would kind of single out that's just like, you need to kind of step it up a little bit to fulfill the potential that obviously there have been several coaches along the line to see it. Let's put it out there and put it on display for the fans. The 4-5-1 seems to be working for St. Louis now. Whether they use that going forward, I don't know. It's not my style of football. I like more attacking football, and when you only have a lone striker, despite the fact that you have 3 attacking players in behind him, I still don't quite like that. If Jeremy Lynch gets healthy, I think that will be a benefit for this team. I really hope to see him come back. Maybe even slide out to a wing spot. He's got so much speed that if you could utilize him on a wing and get somebody who's more of a true put your back to goal and stand people up kind of center forward, if that's the style that they choose to play going forward, that would benefit this team a lot. Focusing solely on the game, it was an entertaining game. As I said, it's not the best game that either one of these teams played all year. But again, what was so entertaining and what was so great to see out of this St. Louis FC team was the tenacity. They didn't necessarily let their head just hit the floor and say, okay, well, this is the last game of the season, who cares now, let's just pack it in. They put their pedal to the floor, decided, hey, we're not going to go out like this. These fans deserve better. We deserve better as players. And they went out there and they did it. And they got the goals. They were very good quality goals. It wasn't like anybody just kind of just tapped one in, and it was something that wasn't necessarily something to behold. Hardware's goal, I mean, he just about outworked everybody. Took the ball. From my vantage point, I thought for sure it was going to go out for a goal kick. I didn't even know that there was a defender on the line, but to just chip it over with enough pace to get through the defender over the line. He almost scored another one very similarly that almost got cleared, almost scored it on the back post, got cleared off the line. But it was an entertaining game. Bryce's goal was just as good, again, outworking the Louisville defense. Louisville had so much speed that was the one thing towards the end of the game that kind of worried you a little bit, was whether they were going to be able to nick something on a counterattack, because St. Louis FC was doing a good enough job in possession and keeping the ball forward, but the speed could have killed them on the way back. But again, defensively, that is when one of the few things that St. Louis FC has been able to hang their hat on. Obviously, everybody's had a bad game here or there. Even as a unit, they have had bad games. But the defense for St. Louis overall was good in terms of making the fewest mistakes, I would say, out of any unit on the field except for goalkeeper. That was another interesting thing, seeing Alex Riggs in there. But obviously, a lot of the loanees got called up to Chicago. I'm not sure if he was in that. I know Patrick Doody was, but I would have to assume the fact that there was no Alex Ken, and obviously the goalkeeping situation was kind of interesting throughout the year. There was an odd shift. Not sure if that was due to injury or just something going on behind the scenes. But overall, final thoughts here. It was an entertaining year. I can't wait for next season to start. Hopefully they make a few changes in terms of the seating and everything. Maybe if there's money within the coffers, do a little bit on the, I believe it's the east side, not the side with the permanent seating, but the other side on the bleachers. Widen those out a little bit, because everybody is pretty much sitting knee to back. And it's a little bit uncomfortable, and people try to get through, and you basically all have to slide out into the aisle. But focusing on the team, I kind of mentioned some of the things where it's like, okay, well, they have some people to build around now. You need to bring in extra depth, especially that middle part of the season when you were really getting into cup competitions and extra matches and midweek matches to kind of jam everything in there. You got to have extra bodies out there, and especially the way that St. Louis FC went through a string of injuries that really kind of hurt their season as well. The deeper you are, you're never going to be as deep as some of these Premier League teams in La Liga and whatever, to where you have superstars sitting on the bench. But you have to bring in quality players. And the one caveat that I would like to see Dale Schilly pick is either form a system that will suit the players that you have, or bring in players to suit the system you want to play. There was too much mixing and matching going on throughout the season. I understand it was a first-year team, but there needs to be a little bit more decisiveness in that. I'd also like to see a little bit extra focus on the fitness. A lot of players coming off in time frames where it's like, that's a little early, and they did look gassed. But there's a lot of players that I'm looking forward to seeing coming back. I'd like to see a few new faces come in as well, whether they're bench players, role players, or even maybe if you can pick up a starter here and there to help out this team going forward. That would be beneficial as well. But again, a great season. Big thanks to all the Louligans out there. I know a lot of you watch this, and special shout out to Mama Fink. I know she checks this video out every now and then. Really nice to meet you that one time at the ballpark Village when they were playing Pittsburgh on the road. Everybody seems to really love her as well, so follow her on Twitter. I can't remember her Twitter handle, but it might be at Mama Fink. But I'm sure if you follow Sam Fink, you could probably find it through there as well. But I'm going to wrap it up here. Rattled on long enough. It was a great season. Hopefully next year they can take the next step and make the playoffs. That is The View from the Midwest. What are your views on today's topic? What did you think of the season? Who was your man of the season, player of the season? What changes do you hope to see come next year? But that is The View from the Midwest. Comment, rate, and subscribe. Give us a thumbs up. Like us on Facebook. And until the next time, I'll see you then.